The briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Group 1 in Coronado was tense, with the kind of focus that came from a mission where every hour mattered. Lieutenant Jordan Hayes stood at attention, his Belgian Malinois Cameron sitting perfectly still beside him as the commanding officer laid out the situation with grim efficiency. Lieutenant Aaron Blackwood, Army Special Forces, disappeared 72 hours ago during a border reconnaissance operation in the San Bernardino Mountains, Commander Charles Patterson said, pulling up satellite imagery on the screen. Last known contact was at 0600 on Tuesday. He radioed that he was investigating suspicious activity near the California-Nevada border area, then went silent. Jordan studied the terrain displayed: rugged mountain country, dense forest in some areas, exposed rocky peaks in others. Temperatures at elevation were dropping into the 30s at night. 3 days was a long time in that environment. "What's the working theory?" Jordan asked. "Equipment failure, injury, hostile contact? All possibilities are on the table," Patterson replied. "The area has activity. Drug smugglers using remote routes, occasional illegal border crossings from people trying to avoid checkpoints. Lieutenant Blackwood is highly trained, experienced in mountain operations. For him to go dark this long suggests something serious." "Search and rescue has been looking," Jordan's teammate, Chief Petty Officer Austin Rivera, asked from across the room. "For 48 hours, with no success. The terrain is too vast, too rugged. That's why we're bringing in specialized assets." Patterson looked at Jordan and Cameron. "Your dog is one of the best tracking canines in naval special warfare. If anyone can find Lieutenant Blackwood, it's you two." Jordan felt the weight of that responsibility settle across his shoulders. Cameron, sensing the shift in his handler's energy, pressed slightly against his leg. Not anxiety, just connection. They'd worked together for 4 years, completed 3 deployments, and Jordan trusted his partner's nose more than any piece of technology. "We'll need something with Blackwood's scent," Jordan said. "Recent, preferably." Patterson nodded to an aide, who brought forward a sealed evidence bag containing a T-shirt. "From his quarters. Hasn't been washed. Worn the day before he disappeared." Jordan took the bag, let Cameron sniff it briefly through the plastic. The dog's nose worked intensely, processing and memorizing the scent signature. Cameron was a Belgian Malinois, specifically trained for human tracking. Not just any human, but specific individuals across difficult terrain and adverse conditions. "Time is critical," Patterson continued. "After 72 hours, survival probabilities drop significantly. Weather forecast shows a storm system moving in tomorrow night, heavy rain, dropping temperatures. If Blackwood is injured and exposed, that storm could be fatal." "Understood, sir," Jordan said. "When do we deploy?" "Helicopter leaves in 30 minutes. You'll insert at the last known coordinates. Local law enforcement and Army Special Forces will provide support, but your lead on this. Find him, assess his condition, and get him home." As the briefing concluded and Jordan prepared his gear, Austin pulled him aside. "You good for this? It's a lot of ground to cover, and if Blackwood doesn't want to be found—" "Why wouldn't he want to be found?" Jordan asked, checking his rifle and medical supplies. Austin shrugged. "Just thinking out loud. Experienced operator goes dark for 3 days in terrain he knows. Could be he's avoiding something or someone." Jordan considered that possibility as he loaded his pack. The official story was reconnaissance gone wrong, but Austin had a point. Special Forces soldiers didn't just disappear without reason. Whatever they found up in those mountains might be more complicated than a simple rescue. 30 minutes later, Jordan and Cameron were airborne in a Black Hawk, flying over increasingly rugged terrain. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Kennedy Brooks, navigated through mountain passes with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. "LZ is going to be tight," Kennedy said over the intercom. "Best I can do is a clearing about half a click from Blackwood's last known position. You'll have to hike in from there." "Copy that," Jordan replied, watching the landscape scroll by below. Dense pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings and steep ravines. This was unforgiving country, beautiful in its harsh way, but deadly if you weren't prepared. The helicopter touched down in a small meadow surrounded by towering pines. Jordan and Cameron jumped out, the rotor wash flattening the grass around them. Kennedy gave a thumbs up through the cockpit window, and the Black Hawk lifted off, leaving them in sudden silence, broken only by wind through trees. "All right, buddy," Jordan said, kneeling beside Cameron and pulling out the evidence bag with Blackwood's shirt. "This is our guy. Let's find him." Cameron's entire demeanor shifted into working mode. His ears were forward, his body tense with focus, his nose already processing thousands of scent particles in the air. Jordan unsealed the bag, let Cameron get a deep scent impression, then gave the command, "Track." The dog's nose went to the ground immediately, sweeping back and forth as he searched for the scent trail. For 5 minutes, they worked the area systematically, Cameron covering ground in expanding circles while Jordan followed, rifle ready, alert for threats both natural and human. Then Cameron's body language changed. His tail came up, his pace increased, and he pulled toward the northeast with sudden certainty. He'd found something. "Good boy," Jordan said quietly. "Show me." They moved into the forest, Cameron following a trail that Jordan couldn't see but trusted absolutely. The dog had never failed him, not in training, not in combat, not in the dozens of missions they'd run together. If Cameron said the scent trail went northeast, then that's where Aaron Blackwood had gone. 3 hours into the track, Jordan was beginning to understand why search and rescue had struggled. The terrain was brutal, steep inclines that left his legs burning, rocky descents that required careful foot placement, dense vegetation that forced them to navigate around obstacles. And through it all, Cameron maintained the scent trail with unwavering determination. The dog was working hard, his breathing elevated but controlled, his focus absolute. Every so often he'd stop, lift his nose to check air scent, then continue with renewed certainty. Jordan had learned to read his partner's body language like a language. The slight change in tail position that meant the scent was getting stronger, the hesitation that meant the trail had been disrupted by water or wind, the sudden surge forward that meant they were close. Around midday, they reached a rocky ridgeline that offered a view of the valley below. Jordan called a brief halt, giving Cameron water from a collapsible bowl and checking his own navigation. According to his GPS, they were about 2 miles northeast of Blackwood's last known position, at an elevation of roughly 7,500 feet. His radio crackled. "Shadow 1, this is Command. Status report." "Command, Shadow 1. We're tracking strong. Cameron's got a scent trail heading northeast, elevation 7,500, no visual contact yet. Copy, Shadow 1. Be advised, that terrain is extremely remote, very few trails, no roads." If Blackwood went that direction, he was either running from something or pursuing something. "Understood," Jordan replied, filing that information away. Austin's earlier comment about Blackwood not wanting to be found echoed in his mind. Cameron finished drinking and immediately returned to the trail, his nose back to work. They descended from the ridgeline into a narrow valley thick with pine and aspen. The temperature was dropping as afternoon wore into evening. Jordan could see his breath now, and the shadows were lengthening between the trees. The scent trail led them to a small stream, where Cameron spent several minutes working both banks before picking up the trail on the far side. Blackwood had crossed here, probably to mask his scent, or simply because it was the path of least resistance through the terrain. As the sun touched the western peaks, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Cameron's behavior changed again. His pace slowed, his body posture becoming more cautious. Jordan recognized the signs. They were getting close, and Cameron's training was kicking in. Approach carefully, assess for threats, maintain tactical awareness. Easy, Jordan whispered, his hand moving to his rifle. Show me, but slow. They crept forward through the dimming forest, every sense heightened. Jordan could hear water running somewhere ahead, another stream, or maybe a small waterfall. The air smelled of pine and damp earth and something else, something that didn't quite belong. Smoke. Very faint, but definitely smoke. Cameron led him to the edge of a small clearing where a rock face rose 30 feet into the air. At the base of that rock face, partially hidden by vegetation and shadow, was the dark mouth of a cave. Jordan's tactical training took over. He found a concealed position behind a fallen log about 50 meters from the cave entrance, settled Cameron beside him, and observed. Smoke was definitely coming from inside the cave, barely visible in the fading light. But there. Someone had a fire in there, which meant someone was alive. The question was, who? He keyed his radio, speaking barely above a whisper. Command, Shadow 1. I've located what appears to be a cave with signs of habitation. Proceeding with caution to investigate. Copy, Shadow 1. Rules of engagement. Observation and assessment first. We'll report findings. Jordan waited, watching for movement, listening for sounds. The forest around them was transitioning into its evening rhythm. Birds settling, small animals emerging for nocturnal activity, the temperature dropping noticeably. Cameron remained perfectly still beside him, alert but calm. After 20 minutes of observation with no movement from the cave, Jordan made his decision. Cameron, heel. Quiet. They approached the cave entrance with extreme caution, Jordan's rifle ready, Cameron moving silently beside him. As they got closer, Jordan could hear voices, low, speaking a language that wasn't English. And underneath those voices, the sound of a child crying softly. Jordan's mind raced through possibilities. Refugees, smugglers, hostages, and where was Aaron Blackwood in all of this? He positioned himself beside the cave entrance, took a breath, and called out clearly, U.S. Navy! I'm coming in. If there's anyone armed inside, put your weapons down now. There was a sudden commotion inside, frightened voices, movement, the scrape of something being dragged across stone. Then a voice, American accent, authoritative, but not hostile. Hold your fire! Friendly forces inside, coming out! A figure emerged from the cave entrance, hands raised, no weapon visible. Even in the dim light, Jordan recognized the face from the briefing photos. Lieutenant Aaron Blackwood, U.S. Army Special Forces, but Blackwood looked nothing like the clean-cut soldier in his service photo. He had 3 days of beard growth, his uniform was dirty and torn in places, and his eyes held an expression Jordan couldn't quite read, relief mixed with something else. Resignation? Defiance? Lieutenant Blackwood? Jordan asked, not lowering his weapon yet. That's me, Aaron replied. You're the rescue team? Lieutenant Jordan Hayes, Naval Special Warfare. Are you injured? Are you being held against your will? Not injured, not a hostage. Aaron's hands slowly lowered. But before you call this in, before you report you found me, you need to see something. Please. Jordan exchanged a glance with Cameron, who showed no signs of alerting to danger. Against protocol but following instinct, Jordan nodded. Show me. Aaron turned and walked back into the cave, and Jordan followed with Cameron beside him, every tactical sense on high alert. The cave entrance opened into a larger chamber, illuminated by a small, carefully controlled fire, and gathered around that fire, watching Jordan with eyes full of fear, were people who clearly didn't belong in these mountains. A woman, maybe 30 years old, holding an infant against her chest. 2 young children, a girl around 7 and a boy around 5, huddled beside her. An elderly man who looked ill, wrapped in blankets despite the fire's warmth. And another woman younger with a medical kit open beside her as she tended to the elderly man. They were not American. Their clothes, their features, the way they held themselves spoke of recent hardship and desperate circumstances. Refugees, Jordan realized, and Aaron Blackwood had found them. "Lieutenant," Jordan said carefully, not taking his eyes off the group. "What is this?" "What it looks like," Aaron replied, moving to stand protectively between Jordan and the refugees. "A family trying to survive. They've been hiding in these mountains for 6 days, trying to make it to—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider, "trying to get somewhere safe." Jordan noticed Cameron's behavior. The dog wasn't alerting to threat, but rather showing the gentle curiosity he reserved for children and vulnerable people. The young boy was staring at Cameron with wide eyes, and the dog's tail wagged slightly. 6 days, Jordan said. "In this terrain? In this weather? With children and an elderly man." The younger woman spoke, her English heavily accented but clear. "We had no choice. Where we were, we would die. Here, maybe we die too, but maybe we live." Jordan's mind was working through the tactical implications, the legal implications, the human implications. "Lieutenant Blackwood, you've been missing for 3 days. There's a massive search operation. Your chain of command thinks you're injured or captured or—" "I know," Aaron interrupted. "I know what they think. But 3 days ago, when I was doing reconnaissance in this area, I found them. The old man, his name is Bashir, had collapsed. Hypothermia, dehydration. The little girl, Skylar, that's what she told me her name is, was showing signs of pneumonia." He gestured to the makeshift medical supplies spread around the cave. "They needed help. Immediate help. I had medical training, supplies, the ability to keep them alive. So I made a choice." "You went dark," Jordan said, understanding dawning. "You chose not to report in because reporting would mean revealing their location." "Exactly." Aaron's voice was firm, unapologetic. "If I'd called it in, what happens? Best case scenario, they get picked up by Border Patrol, separated, deported back to wherever they came from, which based on their stories is a death sentence. Worst case, the situation gets complicated with multiple agencies involved, and these people become political pawns, while that little girl's pneumonia gets worse and Bashir's heart condition deteriorates." Jordan looked at the family again, really looked. The infant couldn't be more than 6 months old. The children were thin, their clothes inadequate for mountain weather. The woman holding the infant, her name tag from some previous life said Ruby, watched him with the kind of desperate hope that came from having no other options. "So you just stayed," Jordan said, "knowing you'd be declared AWOL, knowing there'd be consequences." "I stayed because these are human beings who needed help, and I had the ability to provide it," Aaron replied. "Yes, I knew the consequences. I calculated that Bashir needed at least 3 more days of stabilization before he could handle a journey out of these mountains. I figured I could maybe stretch my absence to 4 or 5 days before it became a career-ending situation." "It's already a career-ending situation," Jordan said flatly. "You've been gone 72 hours without contact. Do you know what that looks like?" "Like I'm a deserter or a traitor or compromised," Aaron said. "I know. But every other option meant abandoning people who would die without help. So I made my choice." Cameron had moved closer to the children, his training overridden by the gentle nature that made him excellent at community outreach events. The little boy, Jordan heard someone call him Peyton, reached out tentatively to touch Cameron's fur, and the dog accepted the attention patiently. Jordan felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. He could call this in right now. Report Blackwood's location, report the refugees, let the chain of command and multiple agencies sort it out. That was protocol. That was duty. But he'd also been in enough situations to know that protocol and duty sometimes collided with basic humanity in ways that required judgment calls beyond what any manual could provide. "How bad are they really?" Jordan asked, kneeling beside the elderly man Bashir. The man's breathing was labored, his color poor even in the firelight. The younger woman, she'd introduced herself as Bella, a former doctor in her home country, answered, "His heart is weak. The journey through the mountains, the cold, the stress, it has damaged him more. He needs real medical care, hospital care, but we cannot go to hospital." "Why not?" Jordan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because we have no papers, no legal status," Bella said simply. "We go to hospital, they help us, then they call immigration, and immigration sends us back to place where we will be killed for helping Americans during the war." Jordan's stomach tightened. He looked at Aaron. "They're refugees? From where?" "Afghanistan," Aaron said quietly. "Ruby's husband worked as a translator for US forces. Bashir was a cultural advisor. Bella worked at a medical clinic we helped establish. When we withdrew, they applied for special immigration visas, the program that's supposed to protect people who helped us, but their applications got stuck in the system. When the Taliban took over, they became targets. They've been running for 2 years, trying to reach safety." Jordan sat back on his heels, the full complexity of the situation hitting him. These weren't just random refugees. These were people who'd helped American forces, who'd been promised protection, who'd fallen through the cracks of a bureaucratic system and ended up hiding in a cave in the San Bernardino Mountains. "Lieutenant Blackwood," Jordan said carefully, "I need to call this in. I need to report that I found you. That's non-negotiable." "I understand," Aaron said, his voice resigned. "Do what you have to do." "But," Jordan continued, "how I report it and what gets prioritized in that report, that's where I have some discretion. Give me a minute to think." He stood and walked to the cave entrance, Cameron following automatically. Outside, the full darkness of night had settled, stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky. His radio waited, ready to transmit his findings to command. Jordan thought about Aaron's choice. To sacrifice his career, his reputation, maybe his freedom to help people who had no one else. Thought about those children in the cave, American-born based on what he'd overheard, who'd never known anything but running and hiding. Thought about Bashir, who'd helped American soldiers and was now dying in a cave because the system that promised to protect him had failed. He thought about duty, about orders, about the clear chain of command that had defined his adult life, and he thought about the moments in his career when following orders blindly would have resulted in innocent casualties, when judgment and discretion had mattered more than rigid compliance. Jordan keyed his radio, choosing his words carefully. "Command, Shadow One, I've located Lieutenant Blackwood. He's alive and uninjured." "Shadow One, outstanding news. What's his status?" "Why did he go dark?" "Sir, the situation is complex. Lieutenant Blackwood discovered civilians in distress, medical emergencies requiring immediate intervention. He's been providing emergency medical care." There was a pause. "Civilians? What civilians? In that terrain?" "Sir, I need to bring Lieutenant Blackwood and the civilians out together. One of them requires urgent medical attention, cardiac issues. I'm requesting medical evacuation for multiple personnel." "Shadow One, clarify. How many civilians? What's their status?" Jordan took a breath, knowing this next part would trigger questions he wasn't ready to answer over an open radio channel. "Command, 6 civilians, including an infant and 2 small children. They're refugees with previous connections to US military operations. I need medevac, and I need it to go through proper channels for refugee processing, not law enforcement channels." The pause was longer this time. Then Commander Patterson's voice came through, sharp with understanding. "Shadow One, are you telling me you've got Afghan refugees up there?" "Affirmative, sir. People who worked with our forces applied for SIVs that were never processed. They're in rough shape, medical emergencies, children at risk." "Jesus," Patterson breathed. Then all business. "Shadow One, this just became a multi-agency situation. I need to brief up the chain. What's your assessment of immediate danger to life? Jordan glanced back at the cave. Sir, the elderly man, previous U.S. cultural advisor, is in cardiac distress. Without proper medical intervention within 24 hours, he'll likely die. One child shows signs of respiratory infection that could develop into pneumonia. Everyone shows signs of prolonged exposure and malnutrition. Understood. What's your recommendation? This was it. The moment where Jordan's answer would determine how this played out. He could recommend immediate extraction with full law enforcement presence, which would save lives but likely result in deportation proceedings. Or he could recommend something else. Sir, I recommend medical evacuation with State Department and Refugee Services coordination. These people have documented service to U.S. forces. They deserve the protection we promised them. Another long pause. Jordan could imagine the conversation happening at command. Legal, political, operational considerations, all colliding. Finally, Shadow 1, stand by. I need to make some calls. Maintain position, keep everyone safe. I'll get back to you within the hour. Copy command. Standing by. Jordan returned to the cave, where Aaron was watching him with an expression somewhere between hope and dread. What did you tell them? The truth, Jordan said. That you found refugees with medical emergencies and provided assistance, that they need help, not arrest. And what did command say? They're making calls. State Department, probably Refugee Services, maybe higher. Jordan sat down near the fire, Cameron settling beside him. It's out of our hands now. We wait. Ruby, the woman with the infant, spoke softly. Will they separate us? Take the children? I don't know, Jordan admitted. But I told them about your service to U.S. forces. That matters. It should matter. Should, Bella repeated bitterly. Many things should matter. But when you have no papers, no power, you learn that should means nothing. The next hour felt like 10. Jordan used the time to assess everyone's medical condition more thoroughly, using his combat medic training. Bashir was definitely in cardiac trouble, irregular heartbeat, labored breathing, chest pain. The little girl, Skylar, was running a fever, her breathing wheezy. Everyone was dehydrated and malnourished to varying degrees. Aaron had done good work. He'd managed to stabilize them with limited supplies, had kept the fire small enough to avoid detection while providing crucial warmth, had rationed his water and field rations to stretch across 6 people plus himself. You know you're probably done in Special Forces, Jordan said quietly, watching Aaron check Bashir's pulse. Yeah, Aaron replied without looking up. I know. Worth it, though. Was it? You could have called it in, gotten them help through proper channels, and waited how long while they froze or died of infection? Aaron looked up, his eyes hard. I've seen how slowly proper channels move. I've watched people who helped us wait years for visas that never came. These people didn't have weeks or months. They had days, maybe hours. Jordan couldn't argue with that. He'd seen the same bureaucratic failures, the same people falling through cracks because their paperwork wasn't quite right or their case wasn't quite urgent enough. The radio crackled. Shadow 1, command. Jordan stepped outside. Shadow 1, go ahead. Shadow 1, I've got good news. State Department has agreed to expedite refugee processing for your civilians based on their documented service. Medical evacuation is inbound, should be on site within 45 minutes. They'll transport everyone to Edwards Air Force Base, where refugee services and medical teams are standing by. Jordan felt tension. He didn't know he'd been holding release from his shoulders. Copy, Command. And Lieutenant Blackwood? A pause. Lieutenant Blackwood will be debriefed separately. His chain of command has been notified, but Shadow 1 off the record? Tell him he did the right thing. Even if it cost him his career, he did the right thing. Understood, sir. Thank you. Jordan returned to the cave and delivered the news. The relief on the faces around the fire was profound. Ruby started crying, Bella put her head in her hands, and even Bashir managed a weak smile. "We will be safe?" Ruby asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Really safe, not sent back?" "You'll be processed as refugees with special immigration visas," Jordan explained. "It's not instant. There's paperwork, interviews, background checks, but you've got documented service to U.S. Forces, and State Department has agreed to expedite. You'll have a real chance." Aaron sat back against the cave wall, looking simultaneously relieved and exhausted. "What about me?" "Debrief at Edwards. Your chain of command knows. Beyond that," Jordan shrugged, "above my pay grade, but command said to tell you that you did the right thing. That's not going to save my career." "No," Jordan agreed. "Probably not. But sometimes the right thing costs something. You knew that when you made the choice." The helicopter arrived 43 minutes later, the sound of rotors echoing off the mountain rocks. It was a larger bird than what had dropped Jordan off, a Chinook with medical personnel and refugee services coordinators on board. Loading everyone took time and care. Bashir was placed on a stretcher, with Bella riding beside him to continue monitoring his condition. Ruby and the children were wrapped in thermal blankets. Jordan carried the infant himself, the tiny child sleeping peacefully despite the noise and chaos. Aaron walked to the helicopter under his own power, flanked by 2 military police who'd accompanied the flight, not in custody, but not exactly free either. Before boarding, he turned to Jordan. "Thank you," Aaron said simply, "for not just calling it in as a desertion situation, for seeing what was actually happening here." "You made it easy," Jordan replied. "You weren't running from duty. You were fulfilling a different kind of duty. Not sure my commander will see it that way." "Maybe not," Jordan admitted, "but you'll sleep at night knowing you saved lives. That counts for something." They shook hands, and Aaron boarded. The children waved at Cameron through the helicopter windows as it lifted off, the dog's tail wagging in response. Jordan and Cameron began the hike back to the extraction point, where Kennedy would pick them up at dawn. It was a long night walk through the mountains, just man and dog and starlight, with plenty of time to think. Jordan thought about Aaron's choice, to stay with people who needed help, knowing it would cost him everything he'd worked for. About the system that had failed these refugees despite their service and sacrifice. About the gap between what policies said should happen and what actually happened to real people in impossible situations. He thought about duty, about the oath he'd taken to protect and defend. Did that oath extend only to American citizens, only to people his chain of command designated as worthy of protection? Or was there a higher duty, a human duty, that transcended borders and paperwork and legal status? As the eastern sky began to lighten with dawn's approach, Jordan's radio crackled with Kennedy's voice. "Shadow 1, this is Eagle 1. I'm inbound to your position, ETA 10 minutes. How'd the mission go?" Jordan thought about how to answer that. They'd found the missing soldier. They'd saved 6 lives, including 2 children and an infant. They'd upheld the promise, however imperfectly kept, that America protected those who helped us. But they'd also exposed the cracks in a system that left people like Ruby and Bashir hiding in caves. They'd highlighted the painful reality that sometimes following orders and doing the right thing weren't the same thing. "Eagle 1, mission accomplished," Jordan finally replied. "Everyone's coming home." "Copy that, Shadow 1, good work." Was it good work? Jordan honestly didn't know. Aaron Blackwood's career was probably over. The refugees faced an uncertain future, even with State Department support. The system that had failed them would continue failing others. But 8 people who would have died were now alive. 2 children would grow up with a chance at safety and education. An infant would have opportunities that would have been impossible in a cave in the mountains or back in Afghanistan under Taliban rule. Maybe that was all anyone could do. Make the choice in front of them, save the lives they could reach, and trust that enough people making those choices would eventually add up to something better. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, and Jordan guided it in with hand signals. Cameron watched the approach with professional interest, no longer bothered by the noise and wind after years of operations. As they lifted off, Jordan looked down at the mountains where he'd found Aaron Blackwood and the family he'd protected. From this height, the cave was invisible, just another shadow among thousands of rocks and trees. But Jordan knew it was there, knew what had happened in that small space. A choice made, lives saved, the messy reality of trying to do right in a world where right wasn't always clear. 3 days later, Jordan received word that Bashir had undergone successful cardiac surgery at a military hospital. Skylar's respiratory infection was responding to antibiotics. Ruby and her children were in temporary housing while their immigration cases were processed. The State Department had fast-tracked their applications based on their documented service and the circumstances of their rescue. And Aaron Blackwood, he'd been given a general discharge. Not honorable, not dishonorable, but something in between that acknowledged both his breach of protocol and his extraordinary circumstances. No criminal charges, no court-martial, but his Special Forces career was over. Jordan found him at a coffee shop near the base, looking like a man still processing what his life had become. "How are you holding up?" Jordan asked, sitting down with his own coffee. "Honestly? I don't know," Aaron admitted. "I spent 10 years working towards Special Forces, gave everything to it. And now it's just done. Any regrets?" Aaron was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I think about those kids in the helicopter, waving at your dog. About Bashir surviving surgery he wouldn't have lived to receive if we hadn't gotten him out. About Ruby crying because she finally believed her children might be safe. And no, I don't regret it. What's next for you? Don't know yet. Maybe something with refugee services. God knows the system needs people who understand what these families have been through." He smiled slightly. "Maybe I can help other people who helped us. Make the system work the way it's supposed to." Jordan thought about that, about taking personal experience and turning it into something constructive, something that might prevent the next family from ending up in a cave in the mountains. "For what it's worth," Jordan said, "I think you're a better soldier than you were before, not because of your skills or your record, but because you proved you understand what we're really supposed to be protecting, which is people, human lives. The ones right in front of us, not just abstract concepts in briefing rooms." Jordan stood to leave. "You did good, Lieutenant. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." 6 months later, Jordan received an invitation to a celebration in Los Angeles. Ruby and her family had received their special immigration visas. Bashir was recovering, slower than hoped, but steady. Bella had found work at a community clinic. The children were enrolled in school, learning English, making friends, building the lives they'd been promised when their family chose to help American forces years ago. Jordan brought Cameron, knowing the kids would want to see the dog. When they arrived at the community center where the celebration was held, Skylar and Peyton ran up immediately, speaking excited English mixed with phrases from their native language, their hands reaching for Cameron's fur. The dog accepted the attention with his usual patience, his tail wagging, clearly remembering these particular children from that night in the mountains. Ruby approached Jordan with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she said simply. "You and Lieutenant Blackwood, you gave my children a future." "Aaron did the hard part," Jordan replied. "I just helped finish what he started." "Both of you did something many would not," Ruby insisted. "You saw people, not problems. You saw children who needed help, not complications to avoid. That is rare, that is precious." Aaron arrived later, and the reunion between him and the family was emotional. The children clung to him. Bashir gripped his hand with surprising strength, and Ruby hugged him like a brother. "I got a job," Aaron told Jordan later as they watched the celebration. Refugee Resettlement Organization, helping families navigate the system, connecting them with resources, advocating for the ones who fall through cracks. "That's good," Jordan said. "You'll be good at that." "I hope so." Aaron watched Skylar and Peyton playing with Cameron, their laughter bright and unself-conscious. "You know what the crazy part is? I thought I was giving up my career for them. Thought I was sacrificing my future. But looking at this, at them thriving, at the work I'm doing now, I'm not sure I sacrificed anything. I think maybe I just found what I was supposed to be doing all along." Jordan understood that sentiment. Sometimes the clearest path forward came from choosing compassion over convenience, humanity over hierarchy, the difficult right over the easy wrong. As the celebration continued around them, food, music, laughter, the sound of children playing, Jordan thought about missions and objectives and success criteria. By traditional metrics, finding Aaron Blackwood should have been simple. Locate him, extract him, return him to his unit. Mission accomplished. But the real mission, the one that mattered, had been more complex. It had been about recognizing that sometimes rules needed to be interpreted through the lens of human need. That sometimes protecting and defending meant defending people the system hadn't quite caught up to yet. That the highest form of duty was recognizing when something bigger than orders was at stake. Aaron Blackwood had understood that 3 days into his disappearance, choosing to stay with people who needed him rather than return to safety. Jordan had understood it when he'd chosen how to report what he'd found. The State Department officials and military commanders who'd chosen to expedite the refugee processing had understood it. And now, 6 months later, watching children play who might have died in a cave, watching families build lives who might have been deported to their deaths, Jordan understood that this was what service really meant. Not the uniform, not the rank, not the career progression, but the willingness to see suffering and respond to it. The courage to make choices that cost something personally but saved something irreplaceable. The understanding that the true measure of a soldier wasn't blind obedience, but moral courage. Cameron, sensing Jordan's reflective mood, pressed against his leg in that familiar gesture of partnership. Jordan scratched behind his dog's ears, grateful, as he always was, for a partner who navigated the world with simpler, truer instincts than most humans managed. "Good boy," Jordan said quietly. "You helped save them too. Led me right to them when it mattered most." Cameron's tail wagged, and in that simple gesture was everything Jordan needed to know about loyalty, about service, about the bonds that made the difficult work worthwhile. As the celebration wound down and families began heading home, to actual homes, not caves or hiding places, Ruby approached Jordan one final time. "My children ask about you," she said. "About the man with the dog who came out of the darkness when we had lost all hope. They ask if you are an angel." Jordan smiled. "Just a sailor doing his job." "No," Ruby said firmly. "Angels come in many forms. Sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they bring dogs who are gentle with frightened children. Sometimes they choose to see people instead of problems." She pressed something into his hand, a photo of her children smiling at the camera, healthy and happy and safe. "Thank you for being an angel when we needed one most." Jordan pocketed the photo, knowing it would join the other reminders he kept of missions that mattered, of choices that had costs, of moments when doing right had been more important than doing easy. As he and Cameron drove back to base in the California evening, Jordan reflected on how the mission had really ended. Aaron Blackwood had lost his career, but found his purpose. Ruby and her family had lost their homeland, but found safety. Jordan had followed orders, mostly, while honoring the deeper imperative to protect those who needed protection. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It had required judgment calls that existed in grey areas beyond what any manual could prescribe. But 8 people were alive who might have died, and in the end, that was the only metric that truly mattered.